Welcome to Redwood Crafts. I'm your host Justin, and today we are talking about a special tool for splitting wood called a glut. What is a glut? A glut is a wooden splitting wedge. Now, I'm sure you've seen a metal splitting wedge that you use for splitting logs. A glut is almost the same thing, but is made out of wood. You make a wooden splitting wedge, one, because they're cheap, two, they're lightweight, three, they're disposable and you can always make a new one. A splitting wedge is a metal tool for splitting logs that takes a lot of metal to make. It took a lot of labor to make. You had to dig up the ore, you had to smelt the ore into metal, you had to then cast the metal or forge the metal into a starting shape, and then you had to forge it into your final shape. It takes a lot of labor to make. That's a lot of metal for one very simple task. It wouldn't necessarily be a cheap tool, and over time they do wear out. A glut, on the other hand, does all the same stuff that a metal splitting wedge does, just maybe not quite as well, but this is much lighter, easier to carry, cheaper to make, and you can always make a new one at a moment's notice if you really need. Up your glut, let's go over to the chopping block. So you want to start with a piece of hardwood. Now in this case I'm using oak because it's what I had quick, easy access to. And you want to start with something probably about 2 feet long, a decent diameter, not such a thick diameter that's going to be a pain to cut, but thick enough to get your final product. So in this case, I'm going to say that's probably about between 3 and 4 inches. And you're going to make 2 gluts out of this one piece. And you're going to use an axe to do it. So here's the axe I'm going to use. You see, it's just a short-handled hatchet with a heavy axe head on it. Makes a good camp axe. So to start, I want to just start chopping into it. Now you want to cut at an angle, and that's easiest done by holding the piece of wood at an angle and chopping straight down. From the bottom, go towards the top, clearing out along the way. And that's once you get it to about this point where you've got both faces of the glut or your wooden splitting wedge planed out with the axe, you can rotate it a quarter, come onto your side, and plane that down. This you don't need to worry about making tapered, just roughly square it off. Now I want you to look at this very carefully into the angle that you're cutting these sides at. Paper to be thin enough that it can go into a crack of wood that you will start off with an axe or another splitting wedge, but you want it to be wide enough that it's the sides that are pressing up against the wood you're trying to split. You're not using that point to cut into and split the wood like you are an axe or a metal wedge. You're using these sides to force a gap open. And so that's where the pressure needs to sit. What you want to do is also take your axe and cut these corners off. And you can make your gluts longer than this. Sometimes you go up to a foot for this. Actually, I'm going to square this off a little bit more. Which doesn't continue up the length. And on the glut, that wedge doesn't have to. Once you get past the main length of your wedge shape, it's not a bad idea to have a little bit of extra room up here, because this will get deformed and flare out and start to splinter as you use it. And so having this extra length just gives you something that you can cut off to keep reusing it until it gets too short to use. So after you do this side, you flip it over and work on the other side. Got a couple knots I want to chop off. Also, safety note, if you are not All right, I have these off, chamfered edges, and that are almost ready to use. But before I frame saw, I want to remember to tighten this up. With this tension line, this blade is not very sturdy in the saw handle. So you want to twist this around until it's got some resistance. And that snaps back against the center brace. Then just start cutting. That's one. That's two. Done with your saw, take the tension off. These are almost done. There's one thing you gotta do yet to finish these off. These square cut edges need to be chamfered. Now chamfer and bevel onto a square edge. Now it helps if you brace this end against your thigh as you do this, so you want to make a fairly somewhere in the neighborhood 45 degrees. And so bracing. All right, so you've cut each 4 sides. Now go again and cut your corners. That's one, and here's 2. That's one, and here's 2. Made without taking too terribly long to make them. You could go use this right now to start splitting logs if you want. Is that you take these and you let them dry for a couple months actually. As they dry out, they'll get harder. Right? Oak is not using them. And I also recommend don't just make 2. Have a couple different sizes, at least 12. You always leapfrog them, so you need a minimum of 3. Set one when the crack opens up farther down, set that in, drive it in, and once that crack opens up, and set your line. And you're gonna go at a time in succession until you've gone down the length of your log. Some logs you might need 5 or 6, depending on the size of the log and how you're splitting it. There's multiple different ways of splitting it, but you're gonna need more than just 1 or 2. So make a bunch. Thank you for watching Wrenwood Crafts. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, or would like to see future videos, share the videos, hit the notification button, tell your friends you enjoyed it. Have a good day. Keep on crafting.